For decades now, RPG books have found themselves in the crosshairs of scandal. Be it blowback from fans, Dungeons & Dragons' satanic panic, White Wolf's endless ability to offend someone, somewhere, or the infamous Fatal and its notoriously deep rule set. However, only one game can claim to have been so dangerous it got its creators raided by the United States Secret Service in 1990. The game so treacherous it warranted a federal raid was Steve Jackson's GURPS Cyberpunk. With the contents of the game feared to be a handbook for cybercrime, the Men in Black set their sights on the game's designer. GURPS Cyberpunk first began development in 1989, based heavily off of William Gibson's famous novel Neuromancer and Pondsmith's Cyberpunk 2013. Stephen Jackson Games hoped that this book, in conjunction with the rising popularity of the cyberpunk genre, would help the company get over some of its financial woes. Stephen Jackson Games, which will henceforth be abbreviated to SJG, wanted someone who had both writing experience and was in touch with the thriving hacker underground of the 80s to give their cyberpunk game a bit of real street cred. SJG had to look no further than Loyd Blankenship, known in the hacking community as the Mentor, one of the co-founders of the infamous 80s hacking group, the Legion of Doom. To really understand this story, we need to start at the very beginning, jumping back to the dawn of the dark side of the internet and through the history of some of the world's first hackers. Even in the early days, the internet had social media, but not quite like how you would imagine it. People gathered on websites known as Bulletin Board Systems, or BBSes. You simply dialed in the address of the host system through your modem, and an array of discussion, images, and files would fill your monitor. You could then leave a message of your own behind that would be rendered when the next user loaded in themselves. BBSes were generally made up of local users, as dialing into systems located far away would incur a long-distance charge from your provider. This meant that your average city or university often had a BBS of its own, made up exclusively of their very own tech geeks. These sites operated somewhat similarly to 4chan's image boards, with many being created around specific topics like computer science, Star Wars, or less savory things like credit card scamming. The more lawless sites attracted those with an affinity for bucking the system or with an anarchist streak, those like Loyd Blankenship. Following the invention of the BBS in 1978, Loyd was immediately hooked on the concept, spending loads of his time chatting with other users who were interested in sharing software, free speech, and getting free calls out of payphones. Since these BBSs often fell into a legal gray zone and were made up of users who were more than likely located nearby, many communicated in coded language or required offerings to build up trust. Since you had to dial into a BBS, many were spread by word of mouth or required you to discover them on other trusted sites' referral list. Once there, you would often be tested by the residents, looking to sniff out any potential feds or posers. It wasn't uncommon to be immediately asked for files, slang for some kind of digital content that contained subversive or otherwise rare information. This information could be anything from stolen company documents or how to listen in on someone's phone calls. Those who could share this information, usually stolen, hacked, or bartered for in other BBSs, became trusted users. Those who couldn't would quickly find themselves disconnected and locked out of that particular walled garden. Now that we've more or less covered what a BBS is, we need to get into Blankenship's Legion of Doom. The first seeds would be sown in an East Coast pirate board known as Plovernet. Plovernet had one goal: acquire forbidden knowledge. How you did so? The sysop didn't care. Users who could post the rarest or the most dangerous information would be worshipped as conquering heroes. With Plovernet sailing along, a small group of power users on the site banded together as the Legion of Doom, under their scrappy 18-year-old leader who went by the alias of Lex Luthor. If it isn't obvious how nerdy these BBSs were, it should be now. Thanks to the obsessive collecting of information by the Legion of Doom, by the mid-80s, Luthor bragged that there was no system they could not break into, be it banking syndicates, CIA databases, or Area 51 alien records. While the Legion of Doom, or LOD, was full of bravado, they hadn't really released anything major yet. In a very cyberpunk way of thinking, the only thing that really mattered to these netrunners was their rep amongst other hackers, and Luthor was determined to make it to the very top. Shortly after their formation, the LOD created their very own BBS and planned on quite the grand opening. The Mentor, or Blankenship, had gotten his hands on AT&T's Technical Journal, a rather dry and academic magazine that announced the company's latest advancements, corporate decisions, and general goings-ons. Blankenship decided to rewrite the entire thing satirically, poking fun at the corpo talk and, in his words, mediocre advancements. The spoof journal was a hit and quickly spread across the pirate boards and brought the LOD into the spotlight. Shortly after his well-received parody piece, Blankenship released a short essay titled The Conscience of a Hacker, or as it's better known, The Hacker Manifesto. First released in a small e-zine known as Phreak, It's a rather quick read, but it sums up the feelings of many a tech geek. often bored at school and finding community and challenge in technology. It laments the numerous arrests of the other computer hackers for the crime of curiosity and for the pursuit of information. The essay went viral for the time and was quoted in the 1995 movie Hackers. While the hacking community treated the text as their new creed, the closing sentence would catch the attention of the authorities. "I am a hacker, and this is my manifesto. You may stop this individual, but you can't stop us all. After all, we're all alike." Following publication, regional groups sprung up calling themselves the Austin Legion of Doom or the Chicago Legion of Doom and began appearing across the country. The Atlanta LOD quickly made a name for themselves when they revealed numerous internal documents from Bell South, which made it readily apparent that they had complete access to their servers, meaning they had control over all the phone lines in the southern US. While the Atlanta LOD never did much with this power, other than give themselves free long-distance calls, the government was of course watching, and Blankenship's essay gave the implication that they were not individual actors, but one cohesive group that needed monitoring. Throughout the mid-80s, the LOD was firmly on the government's radar, but had never transgressed severely enough to earn themselves a proper raid. While individual members would get arrested from time to time, they often only got probation or short sentences as prosecutors found the whole thing hard to understand and judges found it impossible. This would all change in June of '89. Someone had hacked into the Palm Beach County Probation Department using methods published by the Atlanta LOD, and rerouted all incoming calls to an adult phone service in New York. While the hacker and phone phreaker communities found this absolutely hilarious and credited the LOD, this act struck a deep-seated fear for the government. The G-men were terrified of hackers being able to access the 911 system and prevent those in need from getting help. Federal investigators began to get nervous. If this happened to a probation office, it could probably happen to a police department or EMS dispatch. While the boards were quick to crown the LOD for this, and they weren't quick to dispel the notion, it was pretty far outside their typical low-key MO. The real culprit wouldn't be found for some time yet. The gravity of this situation hit Bell South, and together with the FBI, they had set up an intrusion task force. One of their first discoveries was that one of their diagnostic computers had been infected with malware to allow for listening into any switch-routed calls. This essentially meant that LOD members could be listening in to any call in the southern US, including interagency communications, celebrity private lines, and of course politicians. As they dug deeper and deeper into their intrusions, the same name kept appearing, the Legion of Doom. Let's double back once more. The LOD was already on a watch list for their growing infamy on the web, and now their name is appearing everywhere in this Bell South investigation. They were rapidly flying to the top of the Men in Black's to-do list, and things were about to get even worse. Before all the commotion in the summer of '89, the Atlanta LOD chapter was once again about to kick off a massive series of events throughout 1988. A member who went by the alias of Prophet used his Unix hacking skills to extract a classified internal document from Bell South. Prophet quickly gained complete control over the Advanced Information Management System, which contained the company's entire employee information database, along with other sensitive materials. Wanting, of course, to grow his rep online, Prophet fished around for the most interesting data he could find. The document he landed on was titled Control Office Administration of Enhanced 911 Services for Special Services and Major Account Center, or shortened to E911. Can you take a guess at how this made the feds feel when they discovered this document floating around pirate boards online? If that wasn't enough out of the Atlanta chapter, another member who went by the name of Irville got himself entangled in one of the most infamous hackers of the era, FryGuy. While the members of the LOD were interested in hacking as an intellectual pursuit or driven by a rabid curiosity, FryGuy couldn't care less, and was out to make as much money as he could, as quick as possible. Fry earned his moniker after boasting about a hack on his local McDonald's mainframe and boosting the salary of a few of his buddies working there. With his new rep, FryGuy spent some time poking around pirate boards and quickly realized credit card fraud was rampant and an incredibly lucrative scheme. Eventually, on a small German board known as Altos, FryGuy and Irville would cross paths. Enamored with Irville's phone phreaking skills, Fry chatted him up. After talking for some time, Irville taught Fry his technique for spoofing call forwarding. FryGuy wasted no time at putting this new skill to use. Obtaining credit card numbers from various board dumps, began to target various Western unions across the country. Fry would place a money order using one of his stolen credit cards, then implement Irville's phone forwarding technique to forward Western Union's confirmation call to the card owner to his own line. Over the next several months, FryGuy would steal thousands from Western Union locations around the country, thanks to a method taught to him by none other than the Legion of Doom. As FryGuy continued to rob Western Union blind, His ego grew ever larger. Fry began to make daily calls to Indiana's Bell Telephone Company, threatening them that they were powerless to stop him and the Legion of Doom, of which he was never a formal member. Not only was Fry Guy name-dropping the Legion of Doom, but he was closing his calls with a threat that he could crash telephone networks nationally. Now, Fry Guy is what we would today call a script kiddie. He had no real idea of what he was doing, and any methods or hacks he employed were invented or discovered by somebody else. This of course meant that his OPSEC was miserable. Within a matter of days, Bell had managed to trace his phone line and forward his information to the United States Secret Service, who now, post-E911 hack, found themselves incredibly interested in the LOD and phone phreakers. The Secret Service began wiretapping Fry Guy, building on a network of pirate boards and listening in as he communicated with the Atlanta LOD members. It wasn't long before the Secret Service obtained additional warrants to listen in on the Atlanta LOD. To once again make matters worse, further investigation revealed that Fry Guy was the one behind the Palm Beach Probation Office call forwarding prank. In the authorities' eyes, he had already hit police networks and continued to make national level threats. There was no reason not to believe he was capable of doing even more damage. Just a month after his prank, the Secret Service raided Fry Guy's home, or should I say his parents' home, detaining him and all of his computer equipment. Shortly after, Ervil and Prophet, both students at Georgia Tech, would be greeted by the Secret Service. Not long after them, a third member of the Atlanta LOD, Leftist, would also be detained. When Ervil's apartment was searched, the Secret Service found additional bewildering and worrying documents, scattered notes and tales about communist supercomputers, running unfathomable war games, ninjas assassinating corporate leaders, futuristic hacking techniques, and diagrams of brain chips that allowed one to interface directly with computers. These were all, of course, Cyberpunk 2013 roleplay notes, and nothing of actual use. However, the now very out-of-their-depth agents took this to being part of a much larger conspiracy. Ervil didn't make these interrogations easier for himself either. He was incredibly nonchalant about the whole thing, bragging that he too could shut down the network system easily, that the LOD could monitor law enforcement if they wanted to, but to do so would be boring and a waste of time. As agents pressed Ervil, they discovered the original E911 document on one of Prophet's computers. With the piles of evidence discovered, Fry Guy and the Atlanta LOD were staring down federal jail time. To lessen the sentence, all involved immediately flipped on one another. Fry Guy blamed the LOD for corrupting him and turning him into a criminal. Ervil and Prophet began delivering pirate board addresses and lists of LOD associates to the Secret Service. By this point, the Secret Service had felt that they had made good progress in their investigation. They felt that they had detained some of the more dangerous members of the LOD and done their duty in securing national telecommunications. That notion would quickly be dispelled on January 15th of 1990. For around 9 hours, over half of all calls routed through AT&T phone lines would fail, causing some $60 million in damages. The economic damages weren't the only issue. House on fire? All circuits are busy was the response. Grandpa having a heart attack? All circuits are busy. Home being broken into? All circuits are busy. This was the government's nightmare coming to fruition. Critical telecommunications were down, and the Fed's ire fell directly on the LOD. Their first move was to burst into a Missouri frat house that was home to Night Lightning, publisher and editor of the Phreak magazine, the magazine that published cyberpunk developer Blankenship's Hacker Manifesto and was complicit in spreading the E911 document. The agents immediately laid the blame for the hack on Knight, pointing back to his February 1989 publication, which released what they suspected to be the cause of this hack to the public. They weren't finished there. The G-Men confiscated all editions of Phreak and forced Knight to turn over his mailing list, which helped identify countless LOD members and other hackers across the world. Alright, let's finally circle back to why we are here. The Mentor, or Loyd Blankenship, developer for Steve Jackson Games, infamous LOD member and author of GURPS Cyberpunk. Loyd lived two lives, a digital one in which he was one of the most prolific members of the LOD, not carrying out many hacks himself, but routinely distributing hacked information, how-to guides, and writing the Legion of Doom technical journals, which mentored young hackers into capable netrunners. Loyd, by this point, was a bit different from your typical hacker at the time. He was a bit older, more mature, had a full-time job, and was even married. His goal with the LOD was to further computer security, sate his curiosity, and of course share knowledge with the world. In 1989, the same year that he began working on development of GURPS Cyberpunk, Loyd would open a BBS known as the Phoenix Project. The goal was to be an interface for hackers and security professionals, a place to share information and show that all hackers weren't bad. Some just did it for the thrill or love of the game, willing to share their exploits with security staff so they could fix them. Unfortunately for Loyd, he was at the top of Knight's mailing list, heavily featuring Phreak magazine, and of course distributed the E911 document to his faithful visitors, both hacker and professional alike. Loyd ran the site with friend and fellow LOD member Eric Bloodaxe. Eric was the first to read about the January 15th hack and called Loyd in a panic. Eric knew the government would come down hard on this, and that the LOD would probably be at the top of their list. Eric persuaded Loyd to take down the Phoenix Project, but it was already too late. A telecoms investigator by the name of Henry Kloopfel mapped users of the Phoenix Project to another site associated with Loyd, the Illuminati BBS, a site run directly by Stephen Jackson Games, his now employer. The Illuminati BBS had nothing to do with real hacking, but had everything to do with cyberpunk hacking, something your average government suit could easily get confused by. When the Phoenix Project went offline, Kloopfel worried that the Illuminati BBS could still be host to hacked information. Without the site's host, Eric and Loyd still had copies somewhere. The Secret Service wasted no time. Federal agents descended on the homes of Loyd and Eric. Loyd could do little but watch as droves of agents ferreted his computer equipment into vans. While the agents were busy, Loyd turned on a small ham radio in his garage. He tuned into the local police frequency, and what he heard turned his blood cold. This was only their first stop. Next would be his employer, Steve Jackson Games. Loyd immediately ran out front and begged the agents not to raid SJG. The agents, of course, didn't listen, but allowed Loyd to accompany them to open the office so they would not have to break into the building. Loyd may have saved the doors, but the agents tore the offices apart, stripping anything of even minuscule suspicion from the premises. That night, the Secret Service would go on national news like conquering heroes, having defeated the Legion of Doom and brought justice back to the people. A federal spokesperson would point to GURPS Cyberpunk and declare it a how-to guide for hackers, masterminded by none other than the Legion of Doom's wizened sage, the Mentor. If D&D was turning your children into cultists, then Cyberpunk was turning them into net-running cybercriminals. In reality, the Secret Service's raid, coined Operation Sun Devil, would go down in history as one of the sloppiest cases ever undertaken by the agency. The premise of the raid on Steve Jackson Games was poisoned from the start. Federal investigators lied to a judge to obtain the warrant. They had known Loyd Blankenship was the owner of the Phoenix Project, yet claimed that the server was hosted from SJG to obtain a search warrant, after being pressed for cause. Out of Operation Sun Devil would come two major federal cases that would change computer law forever. The first being United States v. Riggs, in which Prophet or Robert Riggs and Night Lightning, aka Craig Niedorf, would be tried for theft and distribution of the E911 document. Riggs had already been previously convicted of computer crimes and was now potentially staring down a 60-year federal sentence. At his lawyer's advice, he entered a guilty plea and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Niedorf, however, chose to fight the case, entering a not guilty plea. The case caught the attention of one John Perry Barlow, Harvard Law Fellow, Grateful Dead lyricist, and essayist in all things cyberspace. Barlow took offense to a hysterical article by the Wall Street Journal, claiming that Niedorf had released a virus capable of bringing down telecoms across the country, when in reality, he simply published a book that could be purchased for $13 from Bell. As Operation Sun Devil played out, numerous cybercrime cases appeared across the country. These cases were in of themselves violations of the First Amendment in Barlow's mind. Together with Mozilla founder Mitch Kapor, Barlow created the Electronic Freedom Foundation to legally represent and defend the digital rights of Americans, filing an amicus brief in support of Niedorf. The EFF located an expert witness by the name of John Nagel, who agreed to testify in favor of Niedorf. Within just 4 days of the trial, the judge declared a mistrial, netting the EFF their first major win and setting Night Lightning free. With United States v. Riggs settled, Stephen Jackson Games would file suit against the United States Secret Service in Steve Jackson Games, Inc. v. United States Secret Service. SJG sued the Secret Service for damages and loss of revenue. With the backing of the EFF and an Austin-based law firm, George Donaldson and Ford, SJG managed to quickly convince a judge of their case. Lying about the warrant would come back to bite them. The judge tore into the Secret Service's lawyers regarding their sloppy work and offered to re-educate them in relevant statutes. The judge would award SJG $50,000 in damages and $250,000 in attorney fees. Outside of Prophet, who pled guilty, Operation Sun Devil would go down as largely a failure. Numerous raids were conducted, leading to few arrests. Heck, even Blankenship was never actually arrested. Those who were arrested found themselves represented by EFF lawyers, who successfully defended them in numerous cases across the country. Overall, this was a humiliating defeat for the G-Men and spawned one of the most important nonprofits in modern times, the EFF. So that's it. That's all I've got. That's how Cyberpunk TTRPG found itself in the crosshairs of federal agents. I hope you enjoyed this little rabbit hole of internet, hacker, and TTRPG history. If you did, please subscribe, it really helps out the channel. I'll see you next time.